8:31, he then began to teach them that the Son of Man, that would be fun to dig into, but we don't have time, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders. He's talking about himself, Son of Man, by the way. It's from Daniel. The chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, because he had been using parables and allusions and metaphors and analogies, but now he's like, listen, the religious leaders are going to reject me, cause me to suffer, I'm going to die, but I'm coming back. Like, what in the world? Now, here's what's fascinating. He says that, but then he says it in the next chapter, and he says it in the next chapter. He says it three separate times. I'm going to be killed and rise again. They're going to kill me, and after 3 days I'll rise. They'll kill me. 3 days later I'll rise. Do you think he's trying to communicate something to his followers? Yeah, I do too. You don't have to be super sharp to get this. He's saying they're going to kill me, but after 3 days I'm going to rise. But this idea has nowhere to land in the minds of his followers. They just can't compute it. We're fortunate because we got thousands of years of understanding the cross symbolizes the death of Jesus. And even if we don't fully wrap our minds around what all that means, we get that. We get that Jesus died and came back to life. We understand that. These guys didn't. They're at the cutting edge of this idea, and it doesn't make any sense to them. You're the king. The king shouldn't die. That's not how this works. And I don't know what you're talking about, rising again 3 days later. That doesn't make any sense. They do not get it. They do not get it. The other day I asked my son, we were driving somewhere. I think we were driving by Costco. And he said, why is Costco cheaper to buy more stuff? Right? So you can go to Costco and you can get a bucket full of peanut butter, but it doesn't cost, as much as it might if you tried to buy that same amount at Target or somewhere like that. So I was like, okay, well, I explain things for a living, so I'm going to explain economy of scale to my son. And I tried to, imagine you had a basketball, because he's really into basketball right now, and somebody asked you to drive it to and I started just going down this road trying to explain it, and you could tell his eyes started to glaze over. And then he said, Dad, I really don't care anymore. I really, it's the idea just doesn't, it's not that, I don't care anymore. And you almost get that feeling from the apostles that Jesus is trying to explain what the idea of the Messiah means, and they're kind of like, I don't get it. Let's talk about something else. Look at how they respond. Now, this is pretty interesting, and I want to be really careful about how we understand this, because this is a section in Mark that moves from the first part of Mark where he's doing all these miraculous things. He's healing, he's casting out demons, doing all these wonderful things. He's showing them who he is. And then you have these 3 chapters where he tries to explain this pretty wild idea that I am the king, and I'm going to suffer, I'm going to die, and I'm going to come back. And in the rest of Mark, he just tells them this is the way things are supposed to be. So this little section that we're reading, Mark 8, 9, and 10, operates like a hinge in the story. So it's really important that we understand what he's trying to do. And I'm trying to draw out the key themes from Mark 8, Mark 9, and Mark 10. So he says it 3 times. He says this thing 3 times, and each of those times, the disciples have an insane response. The first time he says it, he spoke plainly about this in Mark 8:32, and it says, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. That's the strongest language that you can have for telling someone. I didn't want to write shut up Jesus on the screen, because I know there's some kids in here who would be like, uh-oh, that's the bad word. Some kids think that's the S word. Shut up. But that's essentially what Peter is saying to Jesus. I just said it, I know, twice now. That's what he's saying to Jesus. He's saying, you don't get what you're talking about. The king does not walk around talking like he's going to die. He rebuked him. That was Peter's response to Jesus trying to explain to him what was about to happen. Remember, these are likely Peter's memories. So Peter's telling on himself here. It's pretty cool. The second time he says it, the apostles are just like, we don't get it. And then later he's like, hey, when I was trying to tell you that I was going to suffer and die and rise again in 3 days, what were you guys murmuring about behind me? And they didn't want to tell him because in chapter 9, verse 33, they were arguing about who was the greatest. Now, it probably wasn't that drastic, like I'm better than you, you're better than me. It was probably very much Super Bowl halftime show where they were subtly trying to jockey for position. It was probably something like Thaddeus saying once Jesus is on the throne, I probably should be Secretary of Defense. I have this big knife. Mom put me through all those karate lessons when I was a kid. And then, of course, the other guys are like, that's ridiculous. Remember when you had to go to the ER because you were cutting broccoli with that stupid knife? You know, they were just probably having some sort of ridiculous argument about who was the greatest. It probably wasn't, I'm better than you, you're better than me, that sort of thing. It definitely sounds like a Kendrick Drake beef kind of thing. I'm glad we've progressed so far since then. The third time he says it, hey, by the way, I'm going to die and suffer and come back, two of the apostles come up to him and say, hey, can we sit at your right and left hand? And what they're asking for is positions of honor in the new administration. They're like, we're getting in on the ground floor with this new king. We want positions of honor in the new administration. There's honor and power at stake here. None of that happens if you die. They literally feel like they have a vested interest in Jesus not dying. Because if Jesus dies, all this goes away. What have they sacrificed for? They're going to look stupid if Jesus dies. Sorry, kids, that's another S word you're not supposed to say. And then Jesus takes this misunderstanding. 3 different times he says this, and they misunderstand badly. And he takes each time to redirect them and re-guide them into what it really is all about. And this is the real key, the real meat of what we want to talk about today. This is a teaching moment. He says first, he tells Peter, he rebukes Peter, and then he gathers everybody and he says, if you want to save your life, you have to lose it. What? If you want to be first, you're arguing about who's greatest. If you want to be first, you have to be very last, he says. You want positions of honor and power and glory. If you want to be great, you have to be the servant of all. Now, he said this 3 different ways, but these aren't 3 different ideas. They're variations of the same concept that he's trying to drive home with his followers. This is the way to life. This is the way to achievement and greatness, and it doesn't make sense. Now, he doesn't say, and this is valuable, if you've heard this before, if you've been around church for any length of time, you've come across these. You probably heard them preached separately, and I think they actually all go together. He doesn't say that a desire for life is bad. But he says it is found through self-denial. He doesn't say that wanting greatness is bad, but that it's actually accomplished through service. He doesn't say that status is bad, but that it's achieved by positioning oneself last of all. I told you, it sounds nice. You're like, yeah, I like that. That would make a good Instagram caption, but it feels wrong to live. It does feel wrong to live. You'll think you get it, but there's always more to get. It's the answer to the deepest human desires, and it's the very heart of what it means to be a Christ follower. Now, you may read, to save your life, you have to lose it, and you might be like, I don't know. That's a tough concept. I don't want to be taken advantage of. I think that greatness is getting the most valuable player award, not the most inspirational player award. But Jesus is saying something pretty different. Maybe you don't believe me. I've got a list of names up here that in about 2 minutes of Googling, I found quotes from each of these people, most of whom you know, that suggested that all their celebrity, all their status, all their wealth didn't amount to anything. Every single one of them talked about feeling lonely, feeling empty, feeling broken, every one of those people. So if you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe Michael Phelps. If you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe Elon Musk. If you don't believe me, maybe Billie Eilish can do it for you. If you don't believe Jesus, maybe just listen to Aaron Rodgers. I don't know why you'd do that, but maybe. There was a Roman emperor by the name of Septimus Severus, great name, leader of the strongest empire in the history of the known world to that point. And he has this quote. He says, I have been everything, and everything is nothing. A little urn will contain all that remains of one for whom the whole world was too little. You can gain the whole world and lose your soul? What do you have? Well, Septimus Severus found out the hard way. You have nothing. Andre Agassi is a tennis player. He's from back in the day. Great hair. He had this incredible run, 101 weeks, number one player in the world, 60 career titles, 17 Masters titles, Olympic gold. And he wrote this in his autobiography. I play tennis for a living, even though I hate tennis. Hate it with a dark and secret passion, and always have. Does that sound like a happy guy? And you're like, well, yeah, but I would sure like to trade places with him. Look at that great hair. Well, guess what he lost later in life? The great hair. I should have put that picture up there. If you don't believe me, maybe you can believe Andre Agassi. In 2005, this is back when Tom Brady only had 3 Super Bowl wins. And doesn't he look young here? I saw this picture and I'm like, man, looks like a kid. Tom Brady and I are the same age. We've had a similar career trajectory, I think. I really relate a lot to him. This was 60 minutes after his 3rd Super Bowl win, and he said a lot of people would say, hey, man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life. I think it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be all that it's cracked up to be. I've done it. I'm 27. What else is there for me? And the problem is with Tom Brady and Andre Agassi and Post Malone and Billie Eilish and Septimus Severus, all of them, I think, still thought, well, maybe if I just do more of the thing I've been doing, I'll feel differently. So maybe it wasn't 3 Super Bowl rings. Maybe if I have 7 Super Bowl rings, that will do it. That will finally scratch that itch. That will finally make me feel like something is enough. Maybe I need more of the thing that didn't satisfy. Maybe this dead end isn't a dead end. Maybe being the richest human being in the world isn't enough. Maybe I need more power, more wealth, more success. So what Jesus is saying when he says, if you want to live life, you have to lose your life, you have to deny yourself, it's not a threat. He's not saying, I'm going to bring you down. He's warning you the road you're going down is a dead end. And yet, we still have created and live within a culture where we push ourselves and our children to achieve this kind of success. For what? To gain what? The whole world? At the cost of what? What Jesus says is the way of death leads to life. That sounds wrong, Patrick. No. The way of death leads to life. Think about this. The most life-giving relationships that you will ever have are the ones that involve a death to self. Parents, think of all the things that you gave up to have children. Feeling rested, spending money, ever finishing the laundry and the dishes, cleaning up stuff that isn't your own, free time, spontaneity. It's hard to explain to teenagers that 90% of the reason that you give them a curfew isn't for them, it's for you. It's because you can't sleep if they're not home safe in bed, and you can no longer stay up past 10 p.m. So you need them home so you can go to bed. Because when they're out there wandering around, I don't know what it was like before Find My Friends and Life 360. But man, are they okay? Are they safe? I see that they're driving from one place to another, but I want to make sure they're not on the side of the road. I mean, you just can't sleep. Being a parent at its best is a kind of death to self, right? You give up yourself in order to achieve this, and most people long to be a parent because they know that what they gain is so much better. And none of that goes away, by the way. None of that concern for them goes away. A marriage, at least a good marriage, is a death to self, right? It's a death to self. You can no longer spend your money however you want. You can no longer spend your time however you want. Somebody else has a claim on your independence. And when it's good, it's because both parties are acknowledging that I have to give up myself for this other person. And when it's bad, one or both parties have neglected that responsibility. Being married at its best is a death to self. And most people long to spend their lives with someone. But here's what's so hard to understand. This is what's hard for us to wrap our minds around, is that the things that we want most in life, satisfaction, joy, and purpose, they are not lost when we give up self. We don't lose those things. We are afraid we're going to, and that's why we struggle with this. We don't lose those things. This is where they are found. See, you are greater when you serve others. You are first when you put yourself last. You are more you when you are willingly giving up you. And you can see why the apostles didn't get it. It's hard to get. It's a basic concept that's so hard to live out. It will sound good but feel wrong. You'll think you got it, but there's more to get. It's the answer to the deepest human desires that are innate to us. It's the very heart of what it means to be a Christian. I have to read a story for you because I can't think of anything that captures more of what I'm talking about more clearly. And we're going to wrap up with this story. But it's a gentleman by the name of Ernest Gordon. He was a Scottish prisoner of war in World War II. And he, along with hundreds of other POWs, were forced to build this stretch of railway through the jungle. Some of you have seen it in the fictionalized movie called The Bridge Over River Kwai. But this is a true story. And these are brutal conditions, very hopeless. And Gordon writes his own autobiography about the situation, about the story that he was in. And the book is called A Miracle on the River Kwai, and I highly recommend it. This is what he writes. He talks about just the hopelessness and the dissatisfaction and just like the dim reality that they were existing in. But then he talks about this moment when that began to change, and this is what he writes. Let me read this. These are his words. He goes, "The day's work had ended. The tools were being counted by the guards as usual. As the party was about to be dismissed, the Japanese guard shouted that a shovel was missing. He insisted that someone had stolen it. Striding up and down before the men, he ranted and denounced them for their wickedness. As he raved, he worked himself up into a paranoid fury, screaming in broken English. He demanded that the guilty one step forward to take his punishment. No one moved. The guard's rage reached new heights of violence. All die, he shrieked. To show that he meant what he said, he cocked his rifle, he put it on his shoulder, and he looked down the sights to fire at the first man at the end of them. At that moment, one man, I did not know his name, stepped forward, stood stiffly at attention, and calmly said, 'I did it.' The guard unleashed all his whipped-up hate and brutally killed the man, and I'll spare you the details. The book doesn't, but I'll spare you. The men of the work detail picked up their friend's body, shouldered their tools, marched back to camp, and when the tools were counted again, none were missing. The guards had only miscounted earlier." But he says, here's where things begin to change. As this story spread, listen to this. As this story spread, remarkably enough, admiration for the soldier transcended hatred for the guard. Our regeneration, meaning the prisoners of war in the camp, our regeneration sparked by the conspicuous acts of self-sacrifice had begun. It was dawning on us all that the law of the jungle is not the law for man. We have seen in ourselves how quickly it could strip most of us of our humanity and reduce us to levels lower than the beasts. Death was still with us, no doubt about that, but we were slowly being freed from its destructive grip. We were seeing for ourselves that the sharp contrast between the forces that made for life and those that made for death. He says selfishness, hatred, jealousy, greed, self-indulgence, laziness, and pride were all anti-life. Love, heroism, self-sacrifice, sympathy, mercy, integrity, and creative faith, on the other hand, were the essence of life, turning mere existence into living in its truest form. These were the gifts of God to men. Ernest Gordon was not a Christian when he went into the prison camp, but he was a Christian when he came out. See, what the apostles thought, and the thing that we struggle with, because we don't think that we want to conquer the world. We don't really think that, but we actually want some achievement. We want some purpose. We want a little bit of acclaim and applause, but you could call it somehow conquering the world. We want to come out on top of all this. And they thought Jesus was a king and that he was here to conquer the world. But he was after a much bigger prize. Jesus was a king, and he was here to conquer the human heart. And that is what would lead to transformation. That is what it's all about. That is the deepest desire of the human heart. Whether or not you can realize that or acknowledge that, but it is to allow Jesus to conquer your heart and give you life. We're going to sing a song in closing called Just As I Am. And it's an important song because it acknowledges that we do not have to get things figured out before we come to Jesus, but that we come to him for him to help us figure things out, that we come broken. But I want to, right before we sing, I just want to wrap up by acknowledging what Jesus says in this passage. Would you stand as we read this closing passage together, and then we'll sing this song. This closing passage was this. By the way, can I just say, these guys are working overtime to get all this stuff figured out. So if you see the screen go off, it's not because they're not acknowledging it, realizing it, and trying to do what they can to fix it. This is what Jesus says. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Will you sing with us?